Hey, Daniel from GrowYourMusicStudio.com, and in this video, I want to talk to you about having your current customers and students and clients do your marketing for you. Now, when I talk about this, what often goes through the mind of a studio owner is, oh, word of mouth, maybe a referral program, but that's not what I'm talking about. One of the things that I've long taught at Grow Your Music Studio is the idea that locked inside the brains and, if you will, if you'll allow me, the hearts of your clients and your customers are dreams, aspirations, wants, frustrations, fears. The parents of the students in your studio, if you see children, they have aspirations for their kids, fears about their children, insecurities, anxieties. And if we can tap in to those emotional realities and use that in our marketing, if we can tap into the thoughts that parents have about enrolling their kids in lessons, if we can tap into why they're really wanting to do lessons, not just the acquisition of a skill, but what they're hoping for deep down, if we can tap into all of that and then use that in our marketing and use that in the way that we create programs in our studio, overall, our studio business is going to do way better. Now, many years ago, I wrote a blog post about this. It was actually the very first blog post I ever wrote for Grow Your Music Studio. The title of that post was called The Mind Reading Music Teacher. And in it, I talked about how one of the pivotal moments for me in kind of taking my studio to the next level in terms of business and revenue and marketing skill was running a survey with my students. Now, many people have found that post over the years, and a lot of times I'll get feedback. I still get feedback to this day on that post. I still get feedback from clients of some of our marketing programs where I teach them how to do surveys the way that I do them. And what they often say, the complaint that often comes back to me is, I sent a survey out, but no one filled it out, or only, one or two people filled it out. What should I do? Okay, now remember, the reason for this survey is to actually ask meaningful questions of your current clients so that you can take what they're saying and put it in your marketing. That's kind of how I started this whole video. But if they won't fill the survey out, what are you going to do? Well, that's why I'm making this video today. Because over the years, I've addressed this issue before, and I've talked about the importance of follow-up. I've talked about how you should keep sending it until you get a certain percentage of people actually filling the survey out. I've given a lot of hacks and tips and techniques in that way. But what's interesting is I've never actually talked about the way that I've gotten 100% participation in an internal survey with my clients. So, back when my studio was at full capacity, it was at the high water mark for my single teacher studio, I literally would get, out of 95 students that were enrolled, I would get 100% participation. And you might be wondering, how did you manage to pull this off? And that's exactly why I'm making this video, because we actually have a unique opportunity at this time of year. Each person here has a unique opportunity at this time of year to be able to do this. And that is, you need to run a re-enrollment survey for your studio in the fall. As students are coming back from summer break, or if you went through the summer and are starting a new schedule for the school year, you have the unique opportunity to run a re-enrollment survey. Now, the public-facing messaging that you can do on this is that, hey, it's the beginning of a new school year. I need to get your availability. And I also want to update my records on you. People might have moved, you might have a new phone number, you might have a new, better email address. So what I always did in my own studio was I would send this out and I would say, hey, I want to collect all this information. Now, some folks, I can already hear the objections because I've heard them in the past. Well, my students just keep the same spots as before. That's great. If you're not going to be doing a new schedule, then you can use one of these other handy-dandy reasons for running a re-enrollment survey. One of the things that I always said was, I want to keep updated on emergency contact info. I never would expect to have to use it, but if I did, I wouldn't want to be out in the cold with that. A perfect example of that is one time I had a student literally just throw up in my studio. This was years and years ago. This was pre-pandemic. And I had her mom's contact info, her emergency contact info right on file. I literally pulled up my phone, was able to contact that parent within a minute or two. And the mom was very, very grateful. So if you've never collected information like that, you might want to update your records about the child, about, deathly allergies, any medical information that we should be aware of in terms of the student. Parents will appreciate this if you take that extra step and say, hey, I'm just wanting to, update things and, keep everything in line for the coming school year. If you also need to do scheduling for the coming school year, this goes hand in glove with that. I also took this time in a re-enrollment survey to, have parents re-sign a media release form, to re-agree to studio policies for the year. So literally I'd put the studio policies inside the form and then they could check a box. Yes, I agree. I never gave an option for no, I don't. It was just yes, I agree. Yes, I agree. Yes, I agree. So I reminded them of due dates for payment, makeup policy in the studio, drop off and pickup procedure, those sorts of things. But inside that re-enrollment survey, I would have an extra page or two at the end, and I would ask all my standard questions that I would typically send out in a marketing survey, and I didn't make them optional. So literally, if a parent wanted to get onto my schedule for the fall, even if they were just selecting the previous time slot that they had to answer these questions. And so every single year, I would get really fantastic data. And over the years, I would ask different questions. I didn't keep asking the same question every single year. I would look at marketers that I really respected, marketers that I followed, and I would look at, okay, what are the kinds of questions that they ask in their marketing surveys or their internal customer surveys or those sorts of things. Now, obviously, I'm doing this for Piano Studio. So I might not be asking, questions based on physical products. I might not be asking hard-hitting questions like maybe a marketer would ask a potential business-to-business client. Obviously, the questions were consumer-facing, but it was so helpful to get that data. And then I used that data as a jumping off point to have further conversations with parents. If I found a really interesting answer, I would follow up with that parent, sometimes in person, sometimes over the phone, and ask them further questions. Good exercise or a good questioning technique is to use the 5 whys. Because a lot of times someone will give you a really canned answer in their first response. It's just off the top of their head. So you might ask a parent a question like, hey, why'd you enroll your daughter in music lessons? Well, it's just something that we wanted her to be well-rounded. If you leave it right there, that is literally useless data for marketing. This is where the 5 whys come in. Oh, why did you want her to be well-rounded? Or could you tell me a little bit more about that? Why is that important to you? There's all kinds of ways you can take that. Then the parent's taken aback, and they have to actually start digging deeper and giving you meaningful answers. Now, here's why all this is important, and it has to do, and this is probably how I'll wrap this short video up. It all has to do with what I believe is the most effective way to write persuasive messaging for a music studio, and that is the less creative you are, the better. And this has to do with what I've learned from copywriters, marketers. I don't tend to follow the advice of new marketers. I tend really to go to the originals, folks who were writing books on marketing and copy 50 years ago, 75 years ago. Those principles are timeless, or the most important principles to follow are timeless. Let's just put it that way. And what all of that old guard of marketing copywriters said was, you take the words straight out of your customers' mouths. You take those words, you take those concepts, you take those fears, desires, wants, aspiration, goals, as they are expressed verbally by a current client or a potential client, and you use that in your marketing. And then you use frameworks to arrange those concepts and words and sentences and paragraphs and thoughts. I've told this story in the past, but it's one of those that it's just too good not to tell it again. And like I said, I'm probably going to wrap up with this. That many years ago, I had a mom stay after lesson. She sent her daughter out to the car. I was kind of in a break between one of my group lessons, so the current group had just finished. The next group had not yet come in. Mom was standing there talking with me. and she was talking about how discouraged her daughter was, and she shared some sensitive information with me that she, it must have been very difficult for her to express. And that was just that her daughter was struggling in school. She went to a private school, and that she wasn't doing the best, and that she was concerned, and her daughter was concerned. Her daughter was maybe 10, 11 years old, that she wasn't doing as well as her friends in the class. Her daughter knew that she wasn't doing as well as the other, guys and gals at her grade level. And that her daughter had started kind of having some really bad self-talk. And she said a phrase while telling me all this, and she was referring to another family. She said, she's not and she said the last name of another family that was enrolled in my studio from her school. And in that moment, now, of course, I could never use the specific phrase, but in that moment, I got such a deep insight into how that mom was thinking about her own daughter, how she was thinking about the situation as a whole, how she was thinking about parenting her daughter for the next 7 years before she graduated, moved out of the house, that sort of thing. And just, even though I know that mom loved her daughter immensely, that comparison game was there. And I never forgot that phrase. And while I never quite used that specific phrase, I often use that concept in my marketing later. That, not in a negative way, but in a positive way, that in my studio, it was a judgment-free zone, and that there was no need ever to compare because each student would progress at their own rate. And I could then kind of lean back on that story and the emotion that mom felt, and I always wrote much better copy when I was kind of connected to that story, or not that story, that real life account of how that mom felt about her daughter and the result that she was getting, and how she wanted the music lessons to be a place where her daughter could feel free of that judgment. And so, the punchline or the outcome of that story was we ended up moving that particular student into a group where she didn't know anybody because she was better able not to play the comparison game. And I was more than happy to accommodate the mother in that way. That was the whole reason why she had stayed after class to talk to me. But this is a perfect example of how talking to a customer gave me a much better insight into the fears, wants, aspirations, goals, desires of a client. And it gave me a better insight into how I could write copy for my own studio. And the way that connects to the technique that I'm suggesting that you use this fall is your marketing will be so much better if you run surveys and you use those surveys as a jumping off point to start conversations with parents where you can ask, hey, what did you mean when you wrote that in the survey? If on your survey you were to ask a question about, what was the reason, or I'm trying to think of the exact wording of a survey question I've run before. Can you tell me of a success that you've had in the last year, where I gave them an opportunity to write a story? So I always put the questions on the surveys so that they would. So they weren't yes, no, or simple one-word answers. I would always try to encourage people to write a story on there. And some people would be, they would write really bad answers, and I would probably follow up with them. And then some folks, they really poured their heart out there. So I'm not going to get into all the questions I asked there. If you just Google like marketing or customer survey questions, you can find a ton of stuff on that. This is something that we go into in much more depth in our marketing trainings. But I think in a video of this length, it would be much too long to kind of get into it here. But I hope this is helpful. You have a really, really unique opportunity to get some awesome marketing data from your customers this fall, and it's simply by running that re-enrollment survey where you can put a few questions there at the end that are required so that they can't submit that re-enrollment survey until they fill that out. And I got 100% participation every year because I made people know. I made sure that they knew that they weren't getting on my schedule unless they filled this thing out. And people took it really, really seriously. So hope this technique helps you. It's something that I did for years and years and years while I still owned a studio.